This is my 11th year in the House, and this is the first time that I've got up to speak with a personal point. As we move through the budget, everybody understands how difficult the budget process is. Over the last several weeks, we have been working, as we did last year, to joint targets with the Senate. Up until Monday of this week, we had a meeting with the Senate Democrats in hopes that we could reach a resolution for joint targets. Tuesday morning came to a surprise to me. They rolled out their own targets at $7.341 billion, I believe. The ongoing revenue is $7.175 billion. Let's continue on. Let's go back a few years, and with the comments that have been voiced today and in the past days throughout the session, the number always comes up of $408 million of new revenue, especially since the March 19th Revenue Estimating Conference. And if you do not attend that, I would highly suggest at some point that you do. The three individuals on that Revenue Estimating Conference do their research. They work hard to come up with an estimate that by law we have to base the budget on. They take a lot of things into account. They take the economics, and they look at trends, not only statewide but nationwide, to come up with the estimate. March 19th, they reduced that estimate. And so by law, we have to base the budget on the new estimate. It should be no surprise, I don't think, to anybody in this building, the budget principles that the House Republicans have stood firm on for 5 years. We will not exceed spending the ongoing revenue on ongoing expenses. We will not use one-time money to fund ongoing programs. We will not purposely underfund any program or service. When we adopted those principles 5 years ago, let me go back in time. In fiscal year 2008, 102.2% of the ongoing revenue was spent. Fiscal year 2009, 105.5% of the ongoing revenue was spent. Fiscal year 2010, 107.9% of the ongoing revenue was spent. Fiscal year 2011, 111.8% of ongoing revenue was spent. Does anybody remember October 8th of 2009? Is that significant to anybody in this chamber? That's when our governor at that time chose to release a 10% across-the-board cut in state government. So let's go back into a couple of those years. In the 2010 session, which would have been the 2011 budget being worked on, cash reserves. We've talked about cash reserves. Representative Masher referred to cash reserves. $267 million of the cash reserves were spent. There was federal stimulus money of $324 million. That money was spent. Looking at the end of the 2010 session, the economy was not very good. Actually, we had a little growth, but there was signs that it was going to waver. Before building the 2012 budget in 2011, because of the percentages of spending the ongoing revenue, Iowans were strapped with a property tax increase of $500 million. Over $800 million of costs or of borrowing occurred, which now we repay. So you take $800 million times 2, if you add the principal, that money has to come out of the infrastructure fund, the RIF. So now we are strapped with approximately $50 million for the next 17 years, I believe, that come out of RIF that should be used for infrastructure in this state. So Representative Masher, spending more than the state collects does have its consequences. I will use some quotes also from the Nonpartisan Legislative Services Agency. The actual state revenue growth for 16 compared to what we spent last year is 2.6% increase, $180.9 million, not $408 million. According to LSA, the actual state spending last year was $6.995 billion. And with the LSA's assistance with the budget balance, the balance sheet, the estimate of ongoing revenue is $7.175 billion, 180.9. Simple math. Let's look at last year. Had we spent the expenditure limitation amount, $7.631 billion was the expenditure limitation for the fiscal year 15. Had we spent what we are legally allowed to spend, which is the ongoing revenue plus the ending balance, and with the decline in the economy, what do you think the ending balance would be right now? Would it be the estimated $400 million, $420 million? No, it would be a minus $157 million. We would be faced with dipping into the cash reserve, which is required so we can cash flow this state. People that have been in our seats in the past, in the 1980s, they passed some good legislation because they saw that the state could not adequately pay our bills unless we had an adequate cash reserve. That's why the 7.5% is there. So if we spent the maximum allowed, we would be minus 157, which we would be faced with this year of either cutting the budgets or not being able to cash flow the state. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, budget principles, they do have their consequences. We understand it's a tough year. We are going through the budget line by line to find opportunities to reduce the budget so we can provide more spending, more appropriation for our priorities. January 27th, we took up the supplemental state aid bill. January 27th. We sent it over to the Senate. It sat for weeks. Some may say that 1.25 is not the priority of the House Republicans. That's over 50% of the money available compared to what we spent last year. So as we move through the budget process, I understand I've gotten emails from many schools. They are frustrated. We are frustrated also that we can't resolve this. But we do not want to go back to the years where we overspend, especially in a time when the revenue is fragile. And if anybody went to the revenue estimating conference, they heard the word optimistically cautious. They know there's a lot of red flags. USDA is estimating that there'll be another 30% reduction in ag revenue next year. That should give us all some pause as we put this year's budget together. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.